Today's guest has courage. She moved off the grid with her family. How does one do that with children nowadays? What are the struggles? What are the benefits? What if your children have ADHD and you feel like you use the computer to keep them busy? This is the situation for today's guest, and Debbie's answers may surprise you. Debbie Martens is a parent like you and me. I think you're going to really enjoy her story. Does your child have a speech-language delay and you really want them to talk? Do difficult behaviors derail home life and you know the frustration is a communication struggle? Does your child see a speech therapist and you wonder, what do they do and how can I help? If these or similar questions are in your mind, this podcast is for you. Hello, my name is Dinalynn Rosenbusch. I am a speech-language pathologist that has worked with children from birth to 21 for 3 decades. And in my classrooms, I see you wanting to connect with the heart of your child, but their speech and language skills create a barrier. So if you have a kiddo that has difficult behaviors, needs to expand their language or learn to say speech sounds, and maybe even receives speech therapy, stay tuned. Because in this podcast, you will learn how to use your daily life as a tool to communication practice and how to do that practice. You will become confident knowing you are making the difference you want to make. And you will hear success stories of parents who have navigated these struggles already. We'll do this all while focusing on building deep, meaningful connection and confidence in your kiddo. So grab a cup of coffee along with a notebook and pen. It's time to speak in the way your child's brain understands. And that is the language of play. Good morning, listeners. This episode comes out on the day of opening up group coaching for any of you that wants to do it for the summer. I am super excited about this opportunity because as I begin the group coaching process, I'm doing it for free while I figure out some of my details on my end. Of course, that is a perfect time to offer it for free. So 3 dates this summer. Look in the show notes. Today, June 27th at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time will be the first of 3 free sessions, and you just walk on in. And I'm excited to see you and meet you. And now let's listen to this recorded session with Debbie Martens. Thank you, Debbie, for joining me today. Listeners, this is Debbie Martin, and she is a parent like so many of us, and she has been a successful parent. So she's going to tell some of her story about her life raising her kids. Debbie, thank you for coming to the stage at the Language of Play.
Thank you very much for having me.
So tell us, you have 2 boys. They're 7 and 5. Tell us a little bit about the 2 boys.
My 2 boys are very active. They're 2 years apart, high energy. Some of us, we kind of started off in the city, but I wanted more for my kids. So we moved to the country so we could be outside all the time and enjoy nature.
That's cool. What kind of nature things do you enjoy doing?
We like to just do hikes with the dogs, kayaking, swimming. We have a lake on our property, and quadding and dirt biking, camping.
Oh my goodness, those are lovely outdoor activities. I like that lifestyle too. You left the city. Tell me more about the choice to leave the city.
It was becoming more apparent that the city life was very fast-paced. Everything was about bigger, better, new cars, all these fancy toys, and a lot of video game type things going on. And we wanted to bring our children up in more of a natural environment. We live off the grid, so we have to turn on the internet when the kids want to play video games or do anything like that. So we're definitely able to be more in nature as opposed to with the city where we had to drive everywhere to go for a walk. We had to drive to go to the lake. We had to drive to go anywhere we wanted to go. Whereas here, living on the property that we live on, we can just walk out our door and do all the things that we had to drive to do in the city. And because we're in the middle of nowhere, we don't have to deal with neighbors and the stress of crime or anything like that, which we love.
Oh, that sounds so peaceful. Now, I know that screen time has been a tremendous issue for a lot of the parents that I work with. How to say no, how to decide what is okay, what is not okay. You have a natural built in experience because you're off the grid and you have to turn on your Wi Fi, like you just said. Would you tell us the benefits that your family has gotten from being removed so that the Wi Fi is a choice, not an automatic? Can you tell us some of the benefits that has hit your family because of it?
Definitely. Video games have always been kind of my pet peeve. A lot of the kids play them online and want their friends to join them. And my kids had to take some time to understand what it meant to just turn on the internet, to be able to play that game. Whereas most kids don't really understand that. They just have access to the internet, they get on these games. And unfortunately, the longer they're on these games, my kids personally, they become grouchy, they have attitudes, they almost change a little bit. And so we found being off the grid and not having access to video games all the time and really choosing when we use those video games, you notice a huge difference. The longer that you go without them on the video games, it's almost like they come back to real life and they're kinder, they're nicer, they're slower. The video games kind of make them high paced and kind of want everything to work in an instant, as opposed to like we had to go to the library to look something up. They can just go online and look it up. So we too, having off the grid, I try to make my kids look things up as opposed to just looking it up on the internet with the books that we have.
I think that that's probably a very calming thing that happens for the kids. I've heard that screens can give a screen induced ADHD. I've also heard of a screen induced autism. I don't know that those things are diagnosable per se by the DSM or anything like that, but I have heard people talk about these phrases that you probably aren't dealing anything with because of this disconnection. Now, you're mentioning video games, but I'm thinking of it in terms also of the Wi Fi exposure, like the radiation that comes off the Wi-Fi.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Can you talk to that?
Yeah. Well, the nice thing is that when we don't have most of the day, we have our Wi-Fi turned off, so we're not having all that any of that stuff kind of around us or the frequency or anything like that. And it just, yeah, it makes things so much easier. And I kind of feel healthier not having that on all the time and the cell phones glued to our faces or the computers or the iPads. So I definitely, most parents actually quite like my on-off Wi-Fi switch that I have.
I actually have an on-off Wi-Fi switch in my house too, and we always turn it off at night. When we sleep, we take a rest from the frequency, from the radiation. How old were your children when you moved there?
Would have been 3 and almost 5.
Okay, so they had probably had some experience then with computer, like easy access computer, and then I don't know, they're kind of at an age that they may or may not have. Did you see a change in their personalities with the onset of less frequency or screen time or video game?
Definitely. With both my children, they both have ADHD, so they both struggle with that naturally. And just in general, watching TV, movies, video games, anything on the internet like that definitely increases their symptoms of ADHD, their hyperness, their inability to listen, making poor choices. Whereas when I notice the Wi-Fi is off and we're not doing any of that, and we're reading books and we're playing board games and we're outside in nature, those ADHD symptoms almost decrease without any medications or anything like that. It's easier to attribute, especially the longer they're not on it. When it's 3 or 4 days of not being on it, a week, or sometimes we even do like month-long bans where we just don't play video games. We don't have the internet on. If we need our cell phones, we've got our cell phone data. And honest to goodness, it's such a difference in both children in their ability to concentrate and do other tasks, because even the video games, they get off it and they're like, I'm bored. What do I do? They can't think of things to do. And I'm like, we have all these board games. We have Lego. We have Brio, building blocks, so many things you could be doing. And the longer they're not on video games, especially the month long times we go, they're out there using their imagination in the woods and playing with the dogs and creating forts in the house, things that they don't normally do.
I love hearing that you did this. I absolutely love that. When my kids were, oh, I suppose they were about 7, 8, and 9, we got rid of TV. And this was a little before the internet came in. And I didn't have anything during those years for them that was a screen. And at first, they weren't sure what to do, but it lasted about 4 days. And then they started going outside and they were more peaceful and their systems seemed to relax, even from this is TV screen, which doesn't have the radiation coming off of it that computer screens do. They don't have as much of that frequency exposure. So I can only imagine the substantial difference that your kiddos with ADHD experienced when the current screens were removed. So kudos to you for being brave to do that. Did you get kickback from family and friends?
Absolutely. And it was hard because some of these games they play with their friends where they're on the video game at their house, playing with the people that at our house. And so they're like, well, my friend's playing. Well, his parents let him play. So we get a lot of that and other friends being like, how do you do it? How do you keep your kids off of the video games and saying no? And I'm like, unfortunately, it's more work for us parents because at first, sometimes you do need to redirect and help them figure out other things they can do when that screen is now missing, especially if they've had it a long time. So they kind of need those reminders. And friends of mine, they've tried it. They don't quite go quite as long, but they too notice a difference and wish they could go longer. But I do understand why some parents are like, hey, we're busy. Take your video games, play those while we're doing, dinner or talking with friends or whatever the case may be. And I just try not to do that anymore. I try to make it more of a special time if they are playing a video game with their friends. It's a connection thing as opposed to just playing a video game.
Sure. One of the things that I noticed in my kids was that they started gaining skills, actual skills. So they wanted to build something. They learned how to take some branches and hammer and nails and they build something. They learned, like you had already mentioned, to use their imagination and create imaginary games with the neighbor kids out of a stump, a board, and a carpet or something like that. What did you notice that the skills, like nowadays our kids don't have as many skills because they're just on the screen. What do you notice for skills that your children have gained because they're not spending the time on the screen?
For us, some of it's like cooking, having the boys have recipe books that they're reading and following directions on there because it is very different from reading the recipe online as well, as opposed to reading it in the book that's right there in front of you. I find their brains mentally look at it differently. Whereas my son's always wanting to click on like the ad or something on there. Whereas the recipe book, we can cook and we can take time for teaching, measuring things like that, using math and those skills, which video games we wouldn't do. And even when they're building Lego, they will build Lego for hours at a time, the longer they're off screens. When they're on screens, if they go from screens to building Lego later that day, maybe 15 minutes, if that, and they're like, I'm bored, I'm out of ideas, I don't know what to do. And I love those times when we're not on technology for about a month, and I listen to my boys in the Lego room, and they've got this imaginative story going along with dragons and made up stuff that they don't normally come up with on their own. Most of the stuff they talk about is things they've seen on TV or seen in video games. And it's just really nice to hear them making up make-believe stories about what they're building. And they can actually come up with big cities of things that they're building as opposed to just a tiny little car that they're like, I'm done and bored, Mom.
It really is interesting how much the brain expands when given the opportunity to rest and expand. One of the things that I heard not too long ago was about leaders in our country, presidential leaders as well as country leaders in other places. Very few of them allow their kids to have screens in their bedrooms, cell phones, or have Wi-Fi on all the time. So I find that interesting that our world leaders really know that it is a thing, and yet the rest of us are just living in this frequency.
Absolutely. The cell phone actually is another tough one with kids, as my son went from elementary school, and here where we are, grade 7 is the start of high school. It goes from grade 7 to grade 12. And so that's a hard one because a lot of them have cell phones. He wants a cell phone to be able to call and play games on and things like that. it's hard to not feel that peer pressure of getting that phone. But where I was lucky is shortly after starting grade 7, I gave in a little bit. I gave him a cell phone and I said, I just want you to have this so you can call me in an emergency. It's not quite like the elementary school where they can use the school phone all the time and the teachers all have our cell phone numbers so we can text them. But I told him he wasn't allowed to have data on it. But thankfully, within about a month of starting school, our school district actually has tried to ban cell phones in schools. And so the kids actually are not allowed to have them on their person during class time. It has to be either in the office or in their locker. It's not supposed to even be in the classroom with them anymore, which I think is fabulous. And they're actually trying to get the teachers to mimic that, to not have their cell phones. If it is an emergency, then whoever it is that's contacting you can contact the school. Same with parents. And I agree. I don't really want my son answering his phone because I'm texting him in the middle of a school day because he's not A, old enough, and B, doesn't need to have that. Cell phones should be for emergencies only, not for playing with.
Sure. Yes, during the school day, for sure. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Well, like you said, that radiation of having that phone near you all the time, if you're having it all day long at school, at home, once you get home from school, and at night because you've got the phone on beside you, that's a lot of radiation and stuff going through you all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And it wires up your system. It causes your system to not relax. An analogy that I heard was, you know what it's like when you're in a gymnasium and you're watching a basketball game and there's that reverberated noise. And when you're in it, it's fun. It's great. It's fine. But when you step outside from all that busy and all of a sudden you go, in the quiet of outdoors, that's what I was told happens on a cellular level when you turn off the Wi-Fi. That is what got me into turning it off at night. So
I would believe that for sure.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your experience as a parent that has done a bold move to move to a location where your kids are not going to have the stereotypical experience of phone and Wi-Fi and video games as their main way to interact, but rather you're pulling back and having them learn skills, learn interaction, play three-dimensional, and really be healthier in a lot of ways. And that takes a lot of courage. So I'm proud of you, Debbie. That's pretty amazing. Thank you for being here and sharing your story.
Thank you. We think it's pretty special. Thank you so much.
Hey parents, I hope you found this episode helpful. If so, would you please take 30 seconds and share it with a friend who also lives or works with children? I would really appreciate it if you would leave a quick review for the show on Apple Podcasts. I read every review, and it lights me up to know that this show is making a difference. Then come join my Facebook community, where you'll meet other parents who are dedicated to helping their children grow too. You'll find the link in the show notes. Thank you for joining me. Now it's time to go. Let's pop our kiddos in the strollers and go look around outdoors and see what we have to talk about.